Members of a church in Charleston, South Carolina know exactly what the Tree of Life family has been through these past 4 years. They endured a hate-filled massacre of their own in 2015. Just 3 months after the shooting here, members of the two congregations met face-to-face, sharing Christian and Jewish customs in a search for peace and understanding. Now retired KDKA reporter Lynn Hayes-Freeland was invited to join them on the trip of healing.
People travel from all over the world to Charleston, South Carolina because the history here is so rich. Recently, a group of Pittsburghers came to Charleston, but they came to make history. Charleston, South Carolina is one of the most historic towns in the South, from the Revolutionary War to the slave uprisings led by Charleston's son, Denmark Vesey. It is recent history, however, that brought a unique group of Pittsburghers to the city. October 27th, 2018, a date that Pittsburgh will never forget. Robert Bowers entered the Tree of Life Synagogue in a hate-filled rage. He shot and killed 11 people, 3 from the New Light congregation. It was an act that is hard for anyone to come to terms with, especially family members left behind.
At this point in time, I'm not prepared to forgive. I'm still on the angry side of things.
I know that time does do some healing, and it hasn't been long enough for me.
In the weeks that followed the tragic shooting, family, friends, and congregants grappled with grief and mourning, looking for answers and finding few places to turn. Yet 650 miles away sits Mother Emanuel AME Church, a congregation that knows firsthand how it feels to have hate enter a religious space. In June of 2015, Dylan Roof entered the basement Bible study here and shot and killed 9 members of their church.
I was under the table looking up, and when he got to me, he said, "Shut up." "Did I shoot you?" And I said, "No." He said, "I'm not going to. I'm going to leave you here to tell the story."
Polly Shepard is one of the Emmanuel Church shooting survivors, one of those who 3 years later can talk to members of New Light congregation about hurt, healing, and forgiveness.
I tell them, you have to forgive. It's a choice. Either you forgive or you don't. But if you carry it with you, there's no healing. It's like acid on a battery. Once it builds up, the car won't move.
The trip was the idea of Dr. Peg Durachko. Her husband, Dr. Richard Godfrey, died in the Tree of Life massacre. For her, one of the hardest things was just getting here.
Leaving was very difficult because I'm traveling without my husband. But I remember what really struck me was the ability of the people who were in that church to forgive so readily. And that intrigued me, and it actually drew me because I want to learn forgiveness.
These Pittsburghers found their way through Charleston in search of answers and in hopes of finding some form of peace.
I would like to also learn a little more about the healing that has taken place from 2015, which is when the tragedy occurred here, up until now. And maybe even hear a little more about how the people who had to be at the hearing in court, how they dealt with the emotions and, the heartache that they had to revisit.
But that was just the start. Lynn now explains how the trip of healing brought emotions to the surface for both congregations.
Charleston, South Carolina is considered by some to be one of the most beautiful, peaceful cities in the United States. There's a lot of history here that goes back to the early 1800s, but there's recent history here too. Ugly history that connects Pittsburgh and Charleston together forever. These Pittsburghers, members of the New Light congregation in Squirrel Hill, are on a journey. 3 members of their congregation were killed in the hate-driven Tree of Life shooting last October. They've traveled to Charleston, South Carolina to spend time with members of the Emmanuel AME Church, who lost 9 members of their own congregation in a hate-driven shooting in June of 2015.
I would like to also learn a little more about the healing that has taken place from 2015, which is when the tragedy occurred here, up until now.
Dr. Peg Durachko was the driving force behind the Pittsburgh-Charleston meetup. Her husband, Dr. Richard Gottfried, was killed in the October shooting. The highlight for some on this trip, like Carol Black, Gottfried's sister, is the Sunday morning worship service at the very church where 9 people died.
Get a chance to blend those two congregations and you know, we actually see where it happened. It's still kind of raw for us.
Reverend Eric Manning was not the pastor here when the shooting took place, but he has been a big part of the healing process. Emmanuel welcomed the visitors from Pittsburgh, but also recognized their own healing is still a work in progress.
It brought back, from Mother Manuel's perspective, what we went through just about 4 years ago, and our road to recovery is still taking place. And you see yet another congregation who's just starting out. Our hearts go out to them because we know the road is long.
The contingent from Pittsburgh was welcomed at the beginning of the service. The message on this Sunday dealt with forgiveness and trusting God. But it was this moment that touched these 2 congregations in a way that no one anticipated. The members of New Light Congregation were invited to come to the front of the church and line the altar. Then the members of Emmanuel AME Congregation were invited to surround them there, both physically and in love. As these 2 congregations, both victims of hatred, came together, they began to hug. They began to cry. And there was what seemed to be a release of pain and hurt that had been kept inside for a long time.
Being surrounded by all that love and support was so healing, so healing.
The outpouring of love was just totally amazing, and I feel like I accomplished what I came here to do, which is to hug the people in this church, and they were just awesome.
Well, it's still broken, but I feel a camaraderie even closer with the people here now.
Yes.
And it was beautiful.
A powerful trip for both congregations for sure, and one that none of them will ever forget. Up next, a look back at how local interfaith leaders helped Pittsburgh heal in the days and weeks that followed the tragedy at Tree of Life.